evening to you all. My name is Right Worshipful Moses Gomez. I am the Grand Historian of the Grand Lodge of New Jersey. And I'm coming to you live from the mighty George Washington Bridge located here in New York City, where I'm currently stationed and employed as part of the Emergency Service Unit of the Port Authority of New York, New Jersey. I'm coming to you here live on Labor Day as we are flying the largest free-flying American flag in America. In a couple of days, we will be honoring and remembering the tragic event that occurred on 9/11. You will also be hearing a pre-recorded lecture, which I have presented around the world and in many states here in America. This lecture you're about to hear is my story of what I went through the 1993 attacks and the 2001 attacks on our nation's soil. One of the messages I hope you take with you upon hearing my lecture is to never forget what we went through on those two tragic days, but also, more importantly, that you take the spirit and message of resiliency, hope, and one family, one nation under God. One fabulous, wonderful thing that I believe occurred after the 9/11 attacks is that this nation came together as one nation and one people, together united in one cause. And sadly, it takes a catastrophe to bring people together. So I hope that you all remember this story and this lecture and the tragic events of what occurred, and continue that hope and resiliency, and continue to come together as one people and one nation, and don't wait for that next tragic event to happen or attack for us to do so. May God bless all of you. May God bless the United States of America. May God bless all our veterans, past and present, all our healthcare workers and first responders, because it is by their sacrifice that we meet here today as free people and Freemasons. And most especially, may God continue to shine His blessings on the greatest fraternity in the world, Freemasonry. Thank you all. Good night.
Port Authority of New York and New Jersey for 31 years as a member of the emergency unit stationed at the George Washington Bridge. He has responded to both the terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center in 1903 and 2001, which is the base of his presentation for tonight. Right Worshipful Brother Gomez, the floor is yours.
Thank you, my brother. Let me just quickly share this. Now that 9/11, 2011 attacks was a bit different. This was a terrorist organization. There were terrorists working. However, they're working independently, living throughout the United States.
Right,
Many were assimilated into our families. Kids would go to school with our kids. They lived a normal life, scattered throughout the United States. But they were secretly training to one day meet together, board a plane, and there, at a particular moment in time, they would hijack that plane. Not three New York City firefighters who raised the American flag down at the ground zero. They didn't do it for any fanfare. They weren't looking for celebrity status or paparazzi. They took a flag off their engine, which most fire trucks have, and they found this pole kind of makeshift to the side. And in American history, there's been two flag raisings in modern American history which have meant so much and are very iconic. The first is the raising of the American flag in Iwo Jima on Mount Suribachi, when those 7 Marines and 1 Navy corpsman raised that flag after that horrible 30 or 60-day battle, which cost more than 5,500 Marines. And again, the raising of the flag, kind of similar as a bent pole, so it's kind of very iconic that this was raised again in a similar fashion to, again, raise the standard of our nation during this horrible time and tragedy. Now, for the first few years, the flag was missing. It is back at the museum. Brethren, they say that's the flag, and I believe it. I got no reason not to, but they claim they tested it, and I don't know how you can do a DNA on a non-living material, but whatever the case may be, that's the flag, and it's back home after several years. Somehow or another, it was returned to the museum, and now it's here on display again. Our president came to visit us, and if you see here, he's not in a fancy suit and tie. There's no teleprompters, there's no fancy speeches or speakers or sound system. There's no Secret Service. He literally ran up the hill and started thanking all of us there at the scene. The problem was that many could not hear him. So one of the firemen yelled out, "Mr. President, we can't hear you." And he happened to glance down and look at the table below and saw a bullhorn. He raced down, grabbed it, and ran back up, and he started thanking all of us there, all the rescue workers, all the first responders, all those that were giving up their time. And he actually said that the country's behind you, the world is behind you, and those who created this cowardly act will soon hear from us very soon. And effectively on this knoll here started the war on terror, which unfortunately many nations are still fighting today. I'm sure as well as Canada and the United States are both fighting this war on terror. And it's something that has been going on ever since since the towers fell. So again, many thousands of lives have been affected after the towers fell, as many soldiers have been killed or injured or wounded, and still are in harm's way in many parts of the world, defending our freedoms and democracies around the world and ensuring our freedom. So again, this event happened, it's over, but it's not really over, as many are still affected to this very day. Our beautiful Empire State Building lights up with its beautiful outdoor colors every day, but normally they turn off their lights around noon, about midnight. However, they decided to keep their lights on around the clock, red, white, and blue, in honor of all those who perished and all those working at Ground Zero. And especially for those working like myself on the midnight tour, it's nice to be able to look up and see our colors, our nation's colors, proudly being displayed for the world to see, and to show that, you know, we may have been down for a while, but we're not out yet. Prime Minister Tony Blair pledged that Britain would stand full square alongside the United States in the battle against terrorism. And Her Majesty the Queen, Elizabeth II, also did something special. At the changing of the guard ceremony at Buckingham Palace, she ordered that instead of playing God Save the Queen, that the regimental band play the United States national anthem in honor of all those who were injured or killed in those attacks, and to solidify the tremendous allied union between the two nations of the British Empire, the United Kingdom, and the United States. And I thought it was very touching to see that done. I believe that's the only one and only time that anything other than God Save the King or Queen has ever been played other than those two. So it was very touching that she actually did that. Now, brethren, this steel here is column 1001-B. It stands about 36 feet and weighs about 56 tons. It's a principal foundation pillar that rose from the ground up as the building was being built in the foundation of the building. But I call this the perfect ashlar because as we were removing the debris and slowly finding our way, going deeper and deeper down into the foundation level, exposing more of this beam, something unique started happening. As we were chiseling away that profane, that harmful carnage that took place that day, many began to leave insignias, numbers respecting to their units, numbers corresponding to the members of that unit that perished that day, people leaving pictures of their loved ones, prayers, roses, flowers, teddy bears. So by the time it came down to exposing the whole pillar, there was a massive surrounding display of flowers and cards and candles. It was a really show of solidarity and a show of respect. And in turn, it became our perfect ashlar. You know, as Masons, we're all rough ashlars, and hopefully when we meet our maker, we have proven ourselves and have become that perfect ashlar. It may take a lifetime to do that. And again, here, I acquaint this to that rough ashlar as it started. And even though all that ugliness and all that carnage happened, it slowly removed that profane, exposing this beautiful pillar where many came to pay their respects and remember those who were lost on that day. That is now proudly on display again in the museum. If you ever stop by, you'll see the tower there in all its splendor, not far from where it once was raised when the building was being built. Now, there are some stories that many may not know about. About a month or so later into the attacks, the Port Authority came to some of us and decided they were going to create a special group, and we kind of called ourselves Working Below Ground Zero, or the moles, as we was always down beneath the bowels of the building. And there we were tasked with removing anything of importance. It could be an ATM machine, it could be money, seized drugs, weapons, personal or federal vehicles or police vehicles. They didn't want everybody grabbing their hands down there. So they elected a select few. We will go down, we will retrieve anything we find, and then bring it up and hand it to the proper agency that would be waiting up above. On one of those particular days, The Secret Service, which is tasked with protecting the President of the United States, came to us and asked us if we can retrieve their backup presidential limousines, which are down in the World Trade Center, which I never knew existed. I never knew they were there. But the key thing about the World Trade Center, it's interesting how you find things out, is that every federal agency in the United States had an office in the World Trade Center. The CIA, the FBI, the DEA, ATF, DEA, all these individuals had offices there. FEMA, OSHA, Secret Service, they all had these offices there because of the significance of New York City. Now, of course, this is the modern version of today's president lead car or lead limousine, which is the president uses. It's called the Beast, rightfully so, because it's an incredible armored and powerful vehicle. Although it's made by Cadillac, as they've been donating the car ever since I believe the Eisenhower years. Again, it's not really Cadillac. Jokingly, I asked one of the chiefs of the Secret Service there, I asked him, I said, how much of this car is Cadillac? And he said, well, the hubcaps and the front grille, we keep the logos on just to say it's Cadillac, but pretty much most of it is not Cadillac. It's sent out to a private location, undisclosed, and there they rebuild the car and armor it and add all these special tactics and devices to keep the president safe. But the interesting thing was that we were tasked to find these vehicles, which was hard to do. It was in a very precarious location on the other side of the crater. We had to gingerly walk our way around, remove the debris, and try to put dollies under these vehicles and wheel and push it all the way around to the other side where my truck was, so I could be able to remove the vehicle safely to the upper level or the street level. And then when we tried, of course, these vehicles are designed for you not to gain entry. So we didn't have the keys. We couldn't start the vehicle. We couldn't put in neutral. We couldn't get in the vehicle. And apparently someone tried to break one of the windows to no avail. The driver's side the window just would not. I mean, they poked it with a couple of times with an axe, and it didn't do anything to it. And again, it was hard because this vehicle was extremely heavy, and I could not lift it up. So I finally went up to the top, to the street level, and I asked the Secret Service, I know it's a big secret, but how much does this vehicle weigh? Because I'm having a really tough time, and I can't gain access to it. And for the last 2 days, we've been busting our chops trying to get this vehicle out. He goes, well, it's no secret, Mo. It weighs about 12,000 pounds. And I said, well, that's fine because my truck only lifts 6,000 pounds. So that's why I'm having a tough time lifting it up off the ground. And then he reaches in his pocket and he pulls the keys out. And he goes, do you want the keys? And I'm saying to myself, after 2 days of struggling with this vehicle, you had the keys in your pocket. I could have started the vehicle and drove it out. But at the end, we managed to bring, this one didn't start, but we were able to put it in neutral and safely bring it up after I strapped it with some chains and just dragged it out by force because it just was too heavy to lift up. Now, when our president was, at the time of the attacks, he was speaking to a group of elementary children in Sarasota, Florida. And when his press secretary came to him and said, Mr. President, we're under attack. And you can see, if you watch the video, you can see his character and demeanor changes. He kind of loses focus. He's staring into the abyss, realizing how bad things really were. He managed to finish the little session there he had with the children. But again, he was whisked away to Air Force One to begin to evaluate and assess the damage and the potential threats that were still out there, if there were any. And again, Air Force One did what it was designed to do, to protect the president and create a mobile White House platform high above the sky for him to make executive decisions, which he did. Him and the vice president made 2 executive decisions. One was to ground all air traffic in order to find out who was still friendly or enemy, what airplane or what airliner was still a possible threat. The only way to do this was to ground all air traffic. Now, the FAA created a code many years ago called Air Traffic Control Zero. And this was designed in case of an emergency. This beacon was activated and it sent a signal to all air traffic controllers and all airplane transponders, instructing them with one order and one order only: land immediately at the next available airport. So for the first time, the United States activated this code in the hopes that they would clear the airspace. If there was any planes left, then they could be a possible threat. This way, eliminating those friendly planes that may not be a threat. Well, shortly after that initiated, around 11 a.m. in the morning, this is how the North American air defense space looked. There was barely fewer planes left. and most of them were military guarding the skies above. And this opens up the other issue that happened, that many of these planes were forced to land in a destination they had no intending of going. So all these people that were flying these planes landed in many parts of the country, or in North America for that matter, without hotel reservations, car reservations. They had no flights back. So imagine landing somewhere, having no family, no friends, no place to stay, and having to now start to look for a place to eat, a place to stay, a place to, some decided to rent a car and drive home if you were close. So again, this disrupted tens of thousands of people all across the country, and not just by air travel. Bus, trains, shipping, everything was shut down until we can evaluate who was friendly, who was an enemy, and if there was another potential threat. Now, several times I had to personally bring certain vehicles for security reasons up to the Staten Island landfill, which was an area where all the debris from World Trade Center was taken to. There it was sorted, sifted through, and checked for human remains. And also it was cataloged and categorized for future reference. As I was there, I took some pictures of some of the rows and rows and rows of just burnt out shells of emergency vehicles that were there, piled up on top of each other. In particular, this one here, this fire truck, which I took a picture of, not realizing that many years later it would come back to be now on display at the museum. Now, if you happen to visit the museum, everything you see in there is as it was that day. There was no special effects done to it. There was no Hollywood, effects done to it. It was cleaned. It was decontaminated. All the harmful chemicals were removed, but the vehicles and all the debris is as it was or as it was found that day. And if you notice, you're looking at the front of the vehicle here, not the rear. That front to the left is where the actual cab and driver and passengers were actually sitting, and there was nothing left of the cab except the aerial remains of the ladder. So it gives you an idea of how much of this vehicle was completely destroyed from the falling building and debris. Another significant moment was the World Trade Center cross. Now, because of the way the building, the World Trade Center was built and the structure of it, where the outer skin was the actual, what held the building up, the floors were actually hollow, there was no columns. When the building came down, some of the contractors found this cross the way it was. So they actually pulled it out of the debris as it was. This was not cut by a welder, it was not cut by a torch, it was not cut by a acetylene torch or anything like that. They found it as is. But something unique happened. It was put off to the side, and it became a focal, iconic point for a place where all peoples can come together. And that's kind of how I resonated with Masonry. Masonry is very unique because it allows a brother from all walks of life, regardless what you preach, regardless what you believe in, regardless of who you are, to come together and meet as in the fellowship and the bonds of fellowship as Masons together. And this particular cross, although to many Christians, of course, it looks like the Christian cross, but actually it was very significant because they actually had to build a concrete pedestal, mount the cross on top, and many peoples came here to pray, not because it was a Christian cross, but because it symbolized unity, it symbolized hope, peace, and it symbolized the pain and respects of those who passed here and those who were still working here and those who were killed, and hopefully that this will never happen again. So again, this was a very, very unique focal point that brought many peoples together, which was something that was very beautiful to see after the attacks. And it is now on display at the museum as well. It is quite small, but it looks small in the picture, but it is quite tall. It's about 13 feet, and I think it weighs about 2,000 to 3,000 pounds. So it's quite an enormous piece of steel standing there. Now, in May of 2014, the president came, Barack Obama, to inaugurate the museum and the Memorial Gardens. And what the finally decision made was that they were no longer going to build any structure or any buildings where the footprint of the World Trade Center stood. All the buildings will be built around the perimeter, and the footprints of where the building would now become the Memorial Museum underground and the Memorial Gardens above ground with the water fountains. And if you look at the corner, there's our perfect bachelor standing 36 feet tall, and they're still about 20 feet to the ceiling. So you are now, as you tour the museum, you're now walking in the actual foundation of where the buildings first started to rise back in the late 60s. So you're actually looking at the actual floor, the ground, the walls. That's actually the foundation of when the building was built so many years ago. And now that's where the actual museum is at now. The other obstacle we had was that because the World Trade Center hub was one of the largest transportation hubs for people to come and go or exchange and get on one train to another train to go to another location, they didn't want 250,000 people walking in and out of this museum. So the Port Authority paid a little over $4 billion to build the Oculus and move it about 2.5 blocks east of where its original location. And here is now the transportation hub, so that the trains are below the museum and people can access the trains and the many different subways without having to go into the museum. They've also built a large mall. I think it's like the 7th or 8th largest mall in the world there. And it literally goes from the back of Broadway all the way to West Side Highway, underneath the roadway, underneath the World Trade Center complex, underneath the museum, and you come up on the other side by the Hudson River. So it's quite an expensive task that they did. And the Oculus is so big of an open cavern that the Statue of Liberty can actually stand inside there without the pedestal. That's how high this Oculus is. And what they did was, around the circumference of where the tower stood, they built this 3-story high water fountain. And around that are engraved the names of all those who perished in both attacks and in all locations, engraved on this rectangular hollow steel tubing. As you see here, all the names are engraved. It's at a 45-degree angle. It's handicap accessible. And all the names of all those who perished, whether you're on a plane, in Pennsylvania, in Washington, the 93 attacks, all the names are engraved on here. And if you go into the museum, you can punch up the person's name you're looking for, and it'll tell you exactly what grid and the location to find the name. And again, it's kind of unique because the names are hollow, so you can actually put, some people put a letter, some people put flowers, and they put some memento through the name, keeping it in perspective with that person who they're going to honor and visit. This is what it now looks like now. The above is the Memorial Fountain and Memorial Gardens. And the two fountains are exactly the same width and dimensions and are spaced exactly as the two towers were when they rose from the ground up as they were being built. Now they both represent a colorful water fountain, which are activated all day and all night till about 11 p.m., even in the winter, and are surrounded are the Memorial Gardens and then the entrance to the museum. Now we also have the Freedom Tower. Its designation is, the real designation is One World Trade Center, but it's been named Freedom Tower because it stands at a height of 1776, commemorating the birth of our independence here in the United States. And it's a very beautiful, modern, sleek, triangular-shaped building, which kind of blends into the skyline. It's been built with many more advanced security features, more safety features. Again, building can withstand another airline attack. No building can, for that matter. But at least it was built with the intention of providing those individuals in the building a fighting chance to get out. We learned from not our previous mistakes, but we increased and learned with better building materials, better safety features in the building. The steel walls are now encased in a solid, not just a solid cinder block wall, but also in a cylindrical steel tube. So it at least provides those trapped in the building a fighting chance to get out of the building and stay alive. When it's all said and done, all the buildings will be built, which should be done by next year. The last building being built now is the Performing Arts Center, which is a new building that was added to it. And all the other buildings, building 3, 4, 5, and 6, are actually bigger than they were before. When the original buildings were much, much smaller, they were about 10 stories. Now every building is at least 70 stories or higher. So again, they've occupied more space and they're allowed to have actually more office space and retail space than the previous buildings had before. Now, every year during 9/11, the anniversary, there's an organization that sets up the beacons of light or the towers of light. And these are powerful LED lights which are set in the same width and dimensions as the two buildings were that day. And they cast this silhouette of light, which shines on a clear day about 10 miles straight into the atmosphere and have been seen as far away as 70 miles, Trenton, New Jersey, which is the capital of New Jersey, which is about 70 miles away. And it's beautiful because from a distance, you see the silhouettes of the building, and it seems like the lights are leaving the ground and into the arms of God who gave life. So it's very unique to see how these lights are displayed, and it's done every year on the anniversary of 9/11. Now, again, interesting stories as this tree here. Now, if you notice this tree, all the other trees around it are bare. There's no life, there's no leaves, there's no buds, there's no flowers. But this tree here is blooming beautifully. Now, this is called the survivor tree. It's the only tree at the Memorial Garden that has a metal fence around it, and it has a plaque depicting the story of this tree. But shortly after the attacks, the buildings came down. Contractors found this little organic material or small calorie pear tree that was still alive. It was badly burnt. It was a big portion of the trunk had been split in half, but the tree survived, and it went to the Central Park Botanical Gardens for care. And they took it, and we never heard from it since. When they started replanting all the trees and all the shrubbery and the greenery to create the Memorial Gardens, as the museum was about to open, received a call from the Central Park Botanical Garden saying, "Remember that little Charlie Brown tree you gave us? Well, it's now a full-grown tree. It's doing magnificent. It's beautiful, and we want to return it back to ground zero." Because it was the interesting thing is that this tree, its species, and botanists and scientists don't understand why the species of tree does what it does. It blooms first and loses its leaves last. Now, I've actually seen it myself. I've been there in late February, which is still winter, and you can see the buds start to come out on the tree. And by early March, it is in full bloom. And it's amazing that it does that because none of the other trees come to life till at least another month. And if you go there in the fall, as all the trees are bare dry with all their leaves, this tree is still shining beautifully. Now, of course, this is how myths and stories are created. And I like to believe that this tree does so because it was the last organic surviving material from ground zero, and it absorbed the lives and souls of those who perished, and it proudly shows them every year by blooming first and losing its leaves last. So again, these are sometimes our stories come up, and that's how I like to equate this beautiful wonder of the tree, which is, it's been mentioned before many times, that people think that's why the tree does what it does. Now, another unique story that happened is the instance with the gold. Now, I know you've heard stories that many of the gold disappeared and the gold evaporated. Brethren, as far as I know, gold doesn't evaporate. So it either now there is a unique perspective on gold. There is a unique thing that happens to gold is that sometimes, very rarely, but sometimes gold will sprout legs and actually get up and walk away. It's a very rare occasion, a very rare oddity and singular occurrence, but gold from time to time does get up and walk away. That is true. So we were contacted by many financial institutions and many brokerage houses and banking and financial buildings and companies to ask if there was any way they can go down there and retrieve their commodities. Now, of course, they said commodities because they didn't want to go out in the open and just say what they were actually looking for, because we were still down there and they didn't want to alarm us to the fact that there might be a lot of gold or money in a certain area. And being that gold has this peculiar property of getting up and walking out by itself, that this might happen tenfold, and by the time they realized that they would have no gold left. So again, on a particular night, we closed ground zero. We gave all the contractors a night off. They hired a fleet of armored trucks. They came down to a train tunnel 2 blocks away, came down to the loading garage, and this man came, and with power, he powered up the safe and opened it. And the only way I can explain how we actually felt, if you've ever watched the movie Goldfinger, Sir Sean Connery is attached to an atomic bomb as Goldfinger is trying to contaminate the gold so his gold will be worth more. And he is faced with this ominous Korean named Oddjob. And throughout the whole movie, Oddjob doesn't utter a single word. All he does is, ah, and he throws that hat around, which cuts people's heads off. And again, that's how I equate it. This is Fort Knox, which, by the way, is the single largest gold depository for American currency. But the single largest depository of gold anywhere in the world is actually the Federal Reserve Bank and the World Trade Center at that time in Lower Manhattan. Now, if you ever watched the movie National Treasure, you see that Nicolas Cage lights up the oil, and quickly what he sees before him is the treasure that him and his father and grandfather before him and great-grandfather had been searching for generations, and they kind of feel vindicated. You know what? They're no longer a bunch of crazies, but they were all right all along. They did find the treasure. This is kind of how we felt when we opened that door and we saw 6,000 square feet of solid silver and gold bullion, 35-pound gold ingots and 75-pound silver ingots. And believe me, brethren, the first thing that went through my mind was Goldfinger, and the only thing that came to, the only utterance I said was, because that's the first vision I got in my mind was Odd Job and Sean Connery in that Fort Knox with all that gold. But again, it was kind of a fun night. We were able to kick off and let off some steam. However, we had to get back into to working at ground zero and to the realization that Port Authority police has the unwarranted distinction of having lost more police officers in the line of duty on a single day than any other police department in the United States. 37 officers were killed, men and women were killed that day. And to honor them, they removed the American flag off the right shoulder and they replaced it with the same patches on the left shoulder, except adding the World Trade Center towers, the American flag, which we have to have by our bylaws, and the number 37 corresponding to those who perished that day. However, the Port Authority family lost 75 members that day, and 38 of them were civilians. Most of them working at the building itself. They were either security guards, they were maintenance men, women, they were individuals working the communication desk. And the interesting thing is that many of these individuals could have left the building. I mean, they were at the ground floor and they knew their way out. They definitely could have gotten out easily. However, because they knew the lay of the land, because they had access to the building, they knew the building, they had keys to the building and many to secure rooms, they decided that they were going to go back in and help those first responders as they managed their way through the building, not knowing the building properly, not knowing where this stairwell would lead, where this hallway would go, where this door led to, and many rooms would be locked. And many paid the ultimate price and were killed in the building as it collapsed because they decided to stay behind and give a helping hand, even though they didn't take an oath of obligation to serve or protect. And many perished because they wanted to do their part and help others escape and evacuate out of the building. But even that number doesn't compare to this number. 343 firefighters, New York City firefighters, perished in that day. The single greatest loss of firefighters in a single day. And if you go back to the beginnings of the New York City Fire Department around the 1850s, to now they've lost a little over 700 men and women. And just imagine they lost about half that amount in one single day. So that's an incredible loss for a first responding unit. And in order to honor them, the Engine 10 and Ladder 10, which is directly across the street from the World Trade Center, it is still there today. They created this 6-foot-tall, 50-foot-long bronze monolith depicting the entire 9/11 scene. If you notice on the left-hand corner is the Maltese cross with the number 343. And beneath that are the names of all the firefighter men and women who perished on that day with their name, rank, and unit that they belong to. Again, this is on the public sidewalk. It's out of the open. It's not a museum. It is an active working firehouse. It is still there today across from the World Trade Center area. And this is accessible at any time, any day or night, any time during the year. It's just a way of honoring them. And it's probably lit and cleaned and maintained on a daily basis as the crew comes out and cleans it and they maintain the lighting on it. So it's a unique and wonderful memorial to those firefighters who perished on that day. Now, often we don't think about the children affected. Now, these children here were killed on board the planes, and they were the only children to be killed at all the attacks, depending on what building. These were children on the plane. And just to give you an idea how this touches more than just a first responder or those at those particular locations, I was given a talk in Georgia, and the senior warden, after it was over, stood up and asked a question. He said, "Mo, I just want you to know that I'm very touched that you would put this picture up because those two young girls to the left, Dana and Zoe, I baptized them in my church. I knew them, I knew their family, I still know their families, And it's the first time I've ever seen anybody speak of them outside of our area and our family here in Georgia. And I respect the fact that you put them on there. And again, it goes to show you that here I'm 700 miles away in another lodge, and there was a senior one who was touched directly because he knew these two young girls. He had baptized these two girls, and they were both killed on the planes on the attack. So it's a very touching story. It goes to show you that this goes beyond the attacks in New York City, Pennsylvania, or Washington, as 27 nations around the world lost their civilians and their citizens in this attack in those three various areas. Now, the newest part of the museum is called the Glade Memorial, and this was opened up 2 years ago, and this was dedicated to all those individuals who had perished because of breathing or ingesting the chemicals while working or doing rescue work at 9/11 or at Ground Zero. And surprisingly, it's incredible to know that the number is over 1,800 now that have perished, and eventually they say that more people would lose their life or be killed because of breathing and ingesting the chemicals at Ground Zero than those killed in the attack. So it still goes to show that even to this day, we're still touched and reminded of those horrific events that happened so long ago, 20 years ago, because people are still dying today for many who went down there to help and assist and aid and are now paying the price by losing their life to cancer or cancer-causing carcinogens from breathing or ingesting the chemicals on that day. Now, the World Trade Center had incredible amount of steel, and a lot of it was kept by the Port Authority and given away to many museums and institutions and memorial gardens around the world. If you wanted a piece, you were more than welcome to have a piece, providing that you pay for transporting the piece of steel or object, and that you didn't sell it for profit or gain profit by displaying it. And here in Afghanistan, in the center of all the Allied flags around the world that are still fighting the battle against terrorism, there is a piece of steel from the World Trade Center commemorating the birth of why all these nations are engaged in this battle against terrorism to this day. The USS New York was commissioned shortly after the attack, and the front portion of the bow of the ship is made with 7.5 tons of steel from the World Trade Center. It was melted and recast again and refabricated, and it was built on this ship. So wherever this ship goes today, in defense of liberty and democracy, it does so in memory and honor of those who perished that day, because the front portion of that ship is made from the melted steel from World Trade Center. Now, the other interesting story, which I do like to talk about, because I don't want this to be about, doom and gloom and horrors, but the story about the Gander, Newfoundland, where this large, what used to be a military airport for those it was created for the planes flying from the United States overseas into European theater. This was the last place where they would refuel and then take off and be able to reach the European continent. Well, when the United States grounded all air traffic, many planes coming into the United States, including military, found themselves with nowhere else to go but to land at this large airport, which could accommodate these large planes, commercial planes. The interesting thing is that this city, Gander, was a very small community, didn't have a lot of hospitality in order to handle this, and it grew within a few hours by 65%. Over 6,600 people descended on this little community. And the interesting thing is that these individuals of this community opened up their homes, their businesses, their lives, and accepted all of the stranded passengers and crew members and servicemen and women, so that nobody was left alone. Everybody was at some particular home. They had a bed, they had food, they had a nice shower, until the airports would open up and they could take off again. So again, it shows the humanity that unfortunately seems to only come out at our worst times. But this is a wonderful story. And again, it shows that even during the darkest times, that the beauties of humanity, the love for humanity comes out. And many of these individuals still talk to each other, they still visit each other because of that great hospitality, that humanity that was opened up that one day when these people needed it most. And this was many parts of the United States and Canada as well that this happened. But this is an interesting story. And there's a musical, Come From Away, which was created and speaks about this story, this magnificent, beautiful story about how humanity really is. Just as you see in this picture here, which was sent to me, which is just an ordinary street in America. I have no idea where it is. But again, when you see the picture afterwards, you see it is completely draped with American flags. And this was everyone's small way to show their appreciation, their support. And that's really special. And that's the beauty of humanity. And it's sad that it has to happen when we're at our darkest times. But again, this is the beauties of how we came together. Now, this video I'm going to play here was aired at the 2002 Super Bowl, which I never knew. It's Anheuser-Busch with their famous Clydesdale horses, largest horses in the world, pulling the team wagon of beer. There's no words, just music. But they make their way all around the country, in many parts of the country, and they make their way down to the Jersey side of Liberty Park, facing where the World Trade Center stood, and to the right is the Statue of Liberty. And then the horses do a magnificent thing. They actually bow their heads and genuflect in the direction simultaneously where the buildings once stood, as an honor of remembrance. And again, sometimes pictures worth 1,000 words. But brethren, the reason I do this lecture is that hopefully we don't forget the tragedies that we happened on that day. There's an old saying that if you forget, if you forget the tragedies, or if you get the horrors of the past, you're doomed to repeat it. Now, I also want you to keep in mind that when this attack happened, the world came together in a way I had not seen since World War II, when the greatest generation fought in that great war. And it's sad to say that we hope that it doesn't take another catastrophe to bring humanity together as one. Now, our fraternity, Freemasonry, offers a very wonderful opportunity which the world can actually learn from. Our fraternity is very unique in that, although we're not perfect in terms of people, Freemasonry is a big institution made up of imperfect men. It gives you the opportunity and the tools to do the right thing and make the right choices. And it's up to you to do that. However, there's very few organizations in the world that allow men to meet together in the bonds of friendship, regardless of the color of your skin, regardless of what God you preach and profess your faith to, regardless of your culture, custom, your creed, your nation, no matter where you go, it allows us to come together. It allows us to agree with each other. And sometimes it allows us not to agree with each other, but again, we have to respect each other.